Hey everyone, welcome to the video. This one we are going over the 3-game Thanksgiving Day slate for today on Draftkings, or tomorrow whenever you're watching this video, or if you're watching it really early, it's in 2 days. But either way, it's the Thanksgiving Day slate. I am looking forward to it. I'm sure you guys are as well. One of the best holidays of the year, if not the best. It's right up there with Christmas. I mean, we got food, we got football, we're off school, we're off work. No matter what it is a fantastic day. And in the comments below, I want to know who your guys' lock of the slate is and your favorite Thanksgiving Day side dish. So my lock of the slate is personally Michael Thomas, and my favorite side dish is stuffing. And more specifically, in Ohio, we have sausage stuffing, and it is absolutely fantastic. You get some Bob Evans sausage, mix it up in there, put it in the turkey, and it is fantastic. And also pumpkin pie is a close second, but those are my favorites. And I'm curious to know your guys' favorites as well. And before we continue, if you guys could leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. Really helps me out. Really appreciate it. You can also follow me on Twitter at ChrisPinell16. And if you're interested in the spreadsheets about every single week for the NFL season or every single night for the NBA season, links available in the description below for my Patreon. And let's get right into the slate. Pretty good slate, I should say. There's one game that really stands out, and we will talk about the quarterback in that game first, and that's going to be Drew Brees. He comes in at 6,800. And he is the top quarterback of the slate, and it's really not that close. And while I don't think he's an absolute lock like some of his teammates are, I'm definitely trying to squeeze him in considering the other quarterbacks and matchups on this slate. So he is definitely my preferred quarterback, and I would try my very best to fit him in, because without him, I feel a little scared considering he's in the late game as well, and I do think he's got some boom potential here versus Atlanta. And this should be the best game for fantasy purposes. We have a 49.5 point over-under, and the Saints have a 28-point team total, which is most on the slate. The Cowboys are close, but just don't come quite close to the Saints here. And Atlanta, it's a great matchup. I know last time they faced Atlanta, it was on week 10, and they scored 9 points. He threw the ball 45 times, 32 completions, 287 yards, which isn't too bad, but no touchdowns, only had 11 fantasy points. But Atlanta went back to their old ways where they gave up a lot of points to Jameis Winston last week and a lot of yards, and I expect them to play the exact same here versus the Saints here. They're 27th DVOA versus the pass, allowing over 23 points per game to quarterbacks, which is 4th most in the NFL, 277 passing yards per game, and 2 passing touchdowns. Drew Brees should be fine here, and he is definitely my #1 quarterback. Not like that's a hot take or anything, but I would try my best to fit Drew Brees in. And then for quarterback 2, Matt Ryan, he comes in at 6,400. Now, he's not my favorite play of the slate, considering Drew Brees is only 400 more. I'd really just rather punt a different tight end if it comes to playing Matt Ryan or Drew Brees. But I guess he's an okay leverage play because he's going to be lower owned. Not like he's going to be like extremely low owned because we only have 3 games on the slate, only 9 quarterbacks to choose from. Or no, 6, my bad. 6 quarterbacks to choose from. But he's going to be a little bit lower owned than Drew Brees, and it's in my favorite game of the night for fantasy purposes. The Saints are 8th DVOA versus the pass, and they should get Lattimore back, which obviously that's going to really boost their pass defense, which has been pretty good this season, but they're still allowing 20 points per game to quarterbacks. He's got Julio Jones to throw the ball to. He's got Calvin Ridley. Russell Gage hasn't looked too bad. No, Austin Hooper hurts a little bit, or I shouldn't say a little bit. It actually hurts a lot of bit, but I do think he's an okay leverage play off of Drew Brees, but trust me, I am going to go out of my way to find the extra 400 for Drew Brees. But if you want to go with the Falcons stack and run it back with a couple of New Orleans Saints guys, that could be a way you could get different in GPPs. But if you're playing cash, definitely get Drew Brees in. Then as for the next quarter, I'm not going to talk about every single player on the slate because that would be just a super long video, and I'm not going to play every single player on the slate. So if I'm punting quarterback this week, I'm looking at Mitch Trubisky. He comes in at 5,300, extremely cheap. And if you can't get up to Brees, I think you can punt with Mitch Trubisky here. He's coming off a 20-point outing versus the New York Giants, which is a fantastic matchup. Threw the ball 41 times, 25 completions, 1 touchdown, 2 picks. Not very good. Did get that rushing touchdown on 7 rushing attempts, which got him to 20 fantasy points. If he doesn't get that rushing touchdown, probably looking a little bit rough here. But if you imagined he got that turned into a passing touchdown instead, you're looking at about 16 to 18 fantasy points there. So not the worst game in the world for someone that's this cheap. And it's a really good matchup versus Detroit. They're allowing 22.2 points per game to quarterbacks, which is 8th most in the NFL right now. They're 24th DVOA versus the pass, allowing 289 yards passing per game and 2 passing touchdowns, and are one of the worst teams at getting interceptions right now, which we know Mitch Trubisky can struggle with that at times. And plus, the running game has not been great so far. Montgomery has sucked, and just this run game in general has as well. So honestly, if you had to go cheap at quarterback, I do think Mitch can squeak out 20 fantasy points here. More realistically, probably in that 15 to 18 point range, but I do think he's got 20 point upside versus Detroit. Should be a little bit lower owned, and if you can get up to Drew Brees, Mitch Trubisky's fine. And he's going to allow you to fit in 2 stud running backs and probably 2 stud wide receivers. So Mitch Trubisky, I think he's fine. And he'd probably honestly be the second quarterback I go to if I can't get up to Drew Brees, and then Matt Ryan probably being my third option. As for running backs, my plan is just to lock in the 2 stud running backs on this slate, considering the other running backs that we have offered to us right now. And as well as Michael Thomas, I want to plug him in too, so we are going to have to find some value on this slate. But let's just start off with ALVIN KAMARA. Now, I know that doesn't feel like he had a great season, but he has had double digits every single week but one where he scored 7. I mean, if you just look at his game log, 19, 22, 15, 13, 16, 11, 37. That's the KAMARA we're used to that. Week 3 versus Seattle, he had 37 fantasy points, had 92 yards to the air, had that really nice long receiving touchdown for 29 yards up the sideline versus Seattle. And then 7 points versus the Rams. That's when Drew Brees got hurt, so I kind of throw that game out of the window because the game plan kind of just got shot, throwing Teddy Bridgewater into the fire there. And then week 1 versus Houston, he had 23 fantasy points. So he has been solid this year. He hasn't really had a ceiling game besides that Seattle one, and the touchdowns haven't been there. But what really makes him so safe is that receiving floor that he offers us every single week. The past 3 weeks, he's had 29 targets. A running back has had 29 targets the past 3 weeks. Most wide receivers would love to have his target volume. He also has 27 receptions in that time frame as well. Just spit all over my camera. I gotta make sure it's still focused. Okay, we're good. But yeah, he's got an elite 21% target share, which leads all running backs right above Christian McCaffrey. He's got a 33 weighted opportunity share, which is first out of all running backs. This game has the highest total on the slate, and the Saints had the highest implied team total. And really the only knock on him has been the lack of touchdowns, which is very odd from KAMARA considering he's been a big touchdown guy the first couple years he's been in the league. So he's still due for some positive regression, even though it's late in the season at this point. But still, I think the touchdowns are coming. It wouldn't surprise me if it came versus Atlanta. And Atlanta has been a little bit, not a little bit, they've been much better versus the run this season compared to last year when they were just like pretty much dead last in every single category. They're not even the worst against receiving running backs. They're 11th DVOA versus the run. But I do trust the Saints to be able to do whatever the heck they want versus them in this game. And it does mean nothing really, but it's just fun to throw out there that KAMARA last year, I believe it was week 3, he had 20 targets versus the Falcons. 20 targets. I mean, that's almost unheard of from a wide receiver, but let alone a running back. He had 20 targets, 15 catches, and that's just the upside of ALVIN KAMARA. Now, he's not a bell cow running back. He only gets about 12 carries per game. He does lose touches to Latavius Murray, but he's very efficient with his touches. Like I said in my other video, ALVIN KAMARA touches are worth more than most running back touches. So, I think that's fine. He doesn't get all the carries in the world because he's efficient and he's just heavily involved in the passing game. And he's still, only getting 12 carries per game, he's still top 12 in touches per game from all running backs. And plus, you guys know I love ALVIN KAMARA. That's probably why this was such a long-winded conversation about the guy. But he is one of my favorite players in the NFL. Love ALVIN KAMARA, and he's going to definitely be in my lineup on this slate. Then the next stud running back, I like Zeke here at 7,400. He seems a bit cheap, and like I said, I am locking in both stud running backs, so I will definitely be having ALVIN KAMARA and Zeke Elliott in my lineups no matter what. Now, has he been great? No, he is not. He's been solid, though. We just really haven't seen a big Zeke ceiling game, but hey, it could come here on Thanksgiving, and I do expect them to feed Zeke. Buffalo has been very, very good versus the past this season, 9th DVOA, but as for the run game, that's a different story. They're much softer. They're 27th DVOA versus the run, and also bottom half team in points allowed to the running back position. So I would expect a run-heavy attack for the Cowboys here. They have a 26-point implied team total. They're 6.5-point favorites at home. He's getting over 20 touches per game, nearly 20 carries per game. He's only 7,400. It seems a little bit too cheap for Zeke here. I know he hasn't been fantastic, but I think you just pretty much have to lock him in. He's going to be extremely high owned. If you fade him, it's going to be extremely scary, and it's a good matchup for him. The Cowboys might struggle to throw the ball here. So definitely got to like Zeke here. I mean, if you look at his game log, nothing too great, but nothing too terrible either. 16, 28, 16, 29, 29. Those are some pretty good games. He had a 3-game stretch of where he went over 100 yards. So that's the kind of Zeke I am expecting in this game. Versus Green Bay, he had 17, 17, 18, 23. 13. And I didn't mean to make it seem like he's been awful this year, which I didn't say that, but he just really hasn't had those 30, 30, almost 40-point games that we've seen from some other running backs this season, which is something we come to expect from a guy like Zeke. We expect over 100 yards on the ground, over 20 carries, a touchdown or two, maybe 3 if we're lucky. But versus Buffalo, I do think he can get you over 100 yards on the ground, get into the end zone, and if we're lucky, maybe get a second touchdown. And hopefully he's involved through the air as well, which he usually is on most games. It's not like he's an elite pass-catching running back like ALVIN KAMARA is, but he usually gets you about 3 to 4 targets per game. So Zeke, definitely a fantastic play on this slate. And then at this point, we're probably going to have to find another running back for our flex spot. You can also go with the cheaper wide receiver if you want to double spend up at wide receiver. But I typically like to go with a running back in the flex spot. You don't have to because it's only a 3-game slate, so you can definitely get different. I'm not saying you have to follow the usual cash game lineup builds for this kind of slate. You want to be different if you want to have a chance at taking anything down. If you're in a huge contest, if you're just in single entries or cash games, just play the best plays. But David Montgomery at 5,400. So I fish played him on week 10 versus Detroit, and he got 6 fantasy points, and he was chalk. Well, he's 100 more in this matchup, but we don't have a lot of options on this slate, and he's going to get volume, and it's a good matchup, and he's just in consideration here. But man, has he been bad. He's been under 3 yards a carry 5 games this year so far, and he's at 3.3 yards per carry on the year. These are awful numbers, but he's still getting decent volume. I mean, 13 attempts last week, 14, 17, 14, 27, 2 versus New Orleans, 11, 21, 13, 18, 6. He's still getting sufficient volume here. He's pretty cheap, and this is a pretty good matchup. He saw 62% of the snaps last week. Detroit is 20th DVOA versus the run, and they're allowing over 30 points per game to running backs, which is second most. And they're also 2.5-point favorites in this game. Nothing too huge, but I do think David Montgomery has a chance to pay off here. He's probably going to have to get into the end zone for him to pay off, and if he doesn't, we're probably looking at probably less than 9 to 10 points. But if he gets into the end zone, I think we can see double digits. And it wouldn't surprise me if you get on the goal line and David Montgomery gets you a couple of goal line touchdowns, has an inefficient day on the ground, but the touchdowns might save you. So David Montgomery is definitely on a short list for me in the flex spot as of right now. And then for the next running back, he's just the cheap flyer of the week for me. It's Bo Scarborough at 4,700. Not a big sample size on the guy, but and I'd prefer not to have to go to this deep for my running back, but I don't hate it. I don't think he's the worst play in the world. This game isn't going to be pretty, and Big Bo Scarborough having a big fantasy day on Thanksgiving would just be the way to start the Thanksgiving slate and have everyone lose their minds on Twitter. I can see it happening already. Not saying he's going to have a good game, but I could definitely see a scenario where this happens. And the past 2 games he started, he had 14 carries and 18 carries, so averaging 16 carries a game. Not too bad. 11 fantasy points, then 8.8 fantasy points. Almost had 100 yards on the ground last week versus Washington. So, he's getting volume, and he hasn't been absolutely terrible. His yards per carry has been better than David Montgomery, so at least he's got that going for him. Now, he's not going to be involved in the passing game. He's got 1 target, and he's really not a pass catcher. And so I wouldn't expect anything from the passing game, so he's going to pretty much have to do all of his work on the ground. But I do think he can do it here. Chicago's been more middle of the road versus running backs this season. I know they kind of shut down Saquon Barkley last week, but beforehand they have not been great versus running backs. So Bo Scarborough, if you had to punt a running back spot, I definitely think you should get KAMARA and Zeke in first. But if you want to use one in the flex spot, I do think Bo is a decent punt-ish play at that position. That's pretty much all I want to play at the running back. If you want to do anything else, you can, just to get a little bit different. If you want to get leverage on ALVIN KAMARA, if you want to fade ALVIN KAMARA, or you can play them both in the same lineup. You could play Latavius Murray, still getting the carries, but KAMARA is going to be get the majority of the passing game work. So I would prefer KAMARA, obviously, but Latavius Murray, you can never rule him out for a goal line touchdown or just breaking one off as well. But let's move on to the wide receiver position. And Michael Thomas, he's 9,100, the most expensive player on the slate, but it's definitely deservedly so. He has been fantastic, and I need a 1 second. But he's been fantastic. I mean, he's the top play of the slate, and I cannot envision a scenario where I don't play Michael Thomas. If I was playing 150 lineups, I'm not a mass multi-entry guy. I play 1 lineup a week, cash games and single entry GPPs. But if I was playing 150 lineups, I'd probably just press the lock button on Michael Thomas. I don't see how this doesn't work out. He's the most consistent player in fantasy football. Yes, even over Christian McCaffrey. McCaffrey did have that single-digit game versus Tampa Bay. Michael Thomas has yet to have a bad game, and I will just take you on a ride through his game log. 29, 28, 31, 30, 25, 16, 44, 18, 16, 18, 25. Half these games were with his backup quarterback. 16 points was his worst game of the year. The guy has been amazing. He offers you a high floor, extremely high ceiling. We saw 44 points versus Tampa Bay. And then, he's been in the 30s multiple times, in the high 20s. Michael Thomas is an absolute monster and consistent. He has a 30% target share, which is second in the league, only behind DeAndre Hopkins. 71% weighted opportunity share, which is tied for first with DeAndre Hopkins. He's getting 11 targets per game, averaging 112 yards per game. And he just dropped 31 points on these guys, 3 weeks ago, where he had 31 fantasy points, 14 targets, 13 catches, 152 yards. Didn't get into the end zone, but still had 31 fantasy points. It's a good matchup. Atlanta's 29th DVOA versus the pass just got killed by Chris Godwin, and they're allowing 41.8 points per game to wide receivers, which is 4th most. Lock him in. I don't care what you do. You got to play Michael Thomas. I would be terrified if I didn't play Michael Thomas, I got to say. Julio Jones. So I think Marshon Lattimore is going to be back for this game. I haven't seen the practice report for today, but I know yesterday they had to do a guesstimation if he would have practices or not, and they listed him as limited, and I heard he has a real shot of returning. So if he does, he's going to be on Julio Jones, which kind of takes me off Julio Jones. Now, he is pretty cheap at $7,300, but I don't see how I'm going to be able to afford Julio Jones if I'm locking in KAMARA, Zeke, and Michael Thomas. So can't really see myself playing Julio Jones. If you play Mitch Trubisky, you could run him with Allen Robinson to get a cheaper stack on this slate. And Allen Robinson, I think he's an okay play. He had a pretty good game last week versus with the Giants, where he had 10 targets, 6 catches, 131 yards, 1 touchdown, 28 fantasy points. Now, he probably will see some Darius Slay, but he also plays in the slot about 40% of the time, which he'll see Justin Coleman. And I will talk about Justin Coleman in a little bit, but that is a favorable matchup for him. So whenever he's in the slot, I think Allen Robinson might be able to bust one and pay off value at $6,700. Definitely be lower owned because it's people are going to spend up for running backs. They're going to spend up for the Michael Thomas, and they're probably going to spend it for Breeze. So it's probably not going to leave you a lot of room for the 6K range at the wide receiver 2 spot. So I can definitely see Robinson going a little bit lower owned, and he definitely has upside, and he's a good receiver. Just depends if Mitch can get him the ball, but it is a good matchup versus the Detroit Lions. So I wouldn't mind Allen Robinson as a nice GPP play. Calvin Ridley, as long as Marshon Lattimore's out, which means, Lattimore would be with Julio Jones. That means Calvin Ridley's going to see some softer coverage here. And that's really the only reason I'd have interest in him. I do expect Atlanta to throw the ball quite a bit. Their run game is non-existent, and New Orleans is obviously elite versus the run. 7th DVOA, and they don't give up 100-yard rushers, and the running back situation for the Falcons is a mess right now. And the Saints are allowing the 9th most points per game to wide receivers. They're 6.5-point dogs. They're going to have to be throwing the ball quite a bit. So I think Calvin Ridley would be interesting in GPPs. Again, probably not easy to fit in your lineups considering his price tag, but he would be on my radar. John Brown, he's been consistent this year, but again, he's playing Dallas. It's a tougher matchup. Really not that much interest there, neither with Kenny Golladay. Amari Cooper, he's very, very cheap. I mean, he's priced below Golladay, John Brown, Ridley, Robinson. So I do think he should probably be around 7K, but his past 2 games, that's where they're factoring the pricing in. But I think he's a solid play here, simply just because of his price tag. And it's a bad matchup versus Tre'Davious White and, the elite pass defense of the Buffalo Bills. And I much prefer Zeke, but Cooper is always the ultimate GPP play. The guy can bust the slate wide open. And I don't know if you guys remember last Thanksgiving. That's exactly what he did. He had 180 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 90-yard touchdown that he took on a slant route where I think he did that spin move, and he busted the slate. If you didn't play Amari Cooper, you were not winning a GPP. Not saying he's going to replicate that, but he's got upside of that every single game. He's also been much better at home this season. I mean, we'll just take a trip through his game log. The guy has been good at home, bad on the road. 0 versus New England, away versus Detroit, 6. Home versus Minnesota, 34. Away versus the Giants, 18. Not too bad. 18 versus Philly at home. 1 versus the Jets away. Although he got hurt in that game, so you really can't count that. But versus Green Bay at home, 42 points. On the road versus New Orleans, 9. At home versus Miami, 28. Away versus Washington, 14. Not too bad. But then at home versus New York, 25 points. The guy's been great at home. He's only 6K. I know it's a tough matchup, but I think he gets you double-digit points here if he goes a little bit lower owned because of his game log. I mean, I'm sure a lot of casual fans are going to play DFS on Thanksgiving because they're going to have nothing else to do, and it's going to be hyped. It's a hyped-up slate because it's Thanksgiving. So, I mean, they're going to look at the game log and be like, well, why would I play Amari Cooper? So, I'm not saying like, smarter football fans are going to know, Murray Cooper's obviously, he had a 2 rough game stretch, obviously much better than his price tag, but it is a tough matchup. But, if you fade the matchup there and just play the talent, 6K is not too bad for Amari Cooper. Then we're going to scroll down a little bit here because I don't have too much interest in any of these guys. Russell Gage, though, I think he's a pretty fine option at 4,500 because we're going to need a salary relief option at one point, and Gage is one of my favorite ones. And if you just look at his game log since Austin Hooper, or really since the Seattle game, week 8, he had 12 points on 9 targets, 5 targets versus New Orleans, 6 points, 4 targets versus Carolina, 5 points. Not great, but I mean, his price was really low. Then last week versus Tampa Bay, 10 targets, 8 catches, 76 yards, and 15 fantasy points. His price has came up a little bit at 4,500, but I do think he is fine. And we are assuming Lattimore is back, so I would assume PJ Williams will slide back into the slot. And you guys know I love picking on PJ Williams. I've been doing it for a long time, and it tends to work out. Gage has played in the slot 60% of the time, so he would be matched with PJ Williams the majority of the time here. I know they moved PJ Williams to the outside, but that's with Lattimore being out. I would assume he would slide back into the slot. And the Saints are allowing the 9th most points per game to wide receivers. They're going to be throwing the ball quite a bit. I don't see them having success running the ball. Probably going to have to play a little bit of catch up here. So Russell Gage, I do think he's a pretty fine salary relief play. Then you can play a couple of these cheap Chicago wide receivers. Taylor Gabriel, he's questionable, but it was actually a non-participant in Tuesday's practice. This actually news came out while I was talking this video, so we can just read it together. I know he had the concussion last week, but it would be a stretch for him to suit up on Thursday. So probably not going to be able to play Taylor Gabriel, but that means a guy I'm going to talk about in a little bit. It's an even better play considering Taylor Gabriel is going to be at the field, so we will save him for a little bit. Or I guess he actually comes up. I thought Ted Ginn was going to come up first, but Anthony Miller, 3,900. I think he's a pretty good value play. The past 2 weeks, he has 11 targets and 9 targets, has 11 fantasy points and 13 fantasy points. So I do think Anthony Miller is a pretty darn good play, especially with Taylor Gabriel looking like a long shot to play in this game. He's played 80% of his snaps in the slot this season, and that means he's going to be lined up with Justin Coleman, who I talked about in a little bit, and this is finally our time to talk about Justin Coleman. He's actually allowed the most touchdowns in the league so far this season with 7. He's allowed the 2nd most receptions and the 3rd most receiving yards. Anthony Miller at 3,900, I do think he's a pretty good play, especially with Taylor Gabriel being out. So don't mind that, and I think he'd be a nice, if you're going to go with the Mitch Trubisky way at quarterback, because if you want to save some salary, Anthony Miller, not a bad pairing. So don't mind Anthony Miller quite a bit. That Taylor Gabriel news especially gave him a little bump. Wasn't totally sure if he was going to play, but looks like he's going to be ruled out, which means Javon Wims will also be a pretty solid play at this point, which he is actually the bare minimum at, I believe he's 3K last time. Yeah, Javon Wims comes in at 3K. He is dirt cheap, going to be, see increased snaps, probably get a couple more targets. He had 2 targets the past 2 weeks. So with Taylor Gabriel looking like a long shot, you can definitely look for Javon Wims to be a complete punt play, so I wouldn't mind that at all either. So I think that's really it at the wide receiver position. So you can play Wims at 3K. It's, I don't really expect much from him, but decent matchup versus Detroit, and definitely going to get a increase in snaps. Ted Ginn Jr., I guess one more guy I could talk about, 3,800. Had 5 targets last week, had 38 yards, didn't get to the end zone, 5 fantasy points. But versus Tampa Bay, 4 targets, 2 catches, 14 yards, got a touchdown. Really, you can't expect a lot from the guy. Maybe he hits on a long ball. Definitely possible versus Atlanta, one of the worst pass defenses in the league. So I wouldn't hate the idea of using Ted Ginn, but I would prefer using Anthony Miller. I do think he's going to get more targets, going to be more involved, and it's also a good matchup for him. Then Traquan Smith, I know he caught the touchdown last week, but I believe he only had 1 catch, 3 targets, 13 yards. So basically you need a touchdown from Traquan Smith to pay off. But if you want to be different, he could just be one of the salary relief guys you use. But again, I would prefer guys like Anthony Miller or Russell Gage, but I understand salary cap is an issue. As for the tight end position, Jared Cook, he's the most obvious spend up of the slate. We're not going to have Austin Hooper here. Let me just quadruple check here, see if any news came out. It looks like he did work out on the field with the Falcons training staff during Tuesday's practice. Was listed as a non-participant on Monday's injury report, so I'm going to assume he is not going to play. Obviously, if he would somehow play, I know he's not going to, but he would definitely be in consideration. But Jared Cook is the top tight end on the slate right now at 4,800. It's not saying much, though, that Jared Cook's our tight end 1, but he's actually been pretty solid the past 5 games he's played. Week 6 versus Jacksonville, 12. Then week 10, 13. Versus Atlanta, same matchup. Versus Tampa Bay, 11. And versus Carolina, 21. And he actually missed 2 other touchdowns. He could have had a monster day. But he's been pretty solid, and he's been seeing some, consistent targets. I shouldn't say consistent. He's been seeing targets, though. 10, then 2 versus Tampa, but then 8 versus Carolina. He's going to be involved in the game plan here. And just cheaper exposure to this offense. If you somehow fade Michael Thomas, I would definitely recommend playing guys like Ted Ginn or Jared Cook, because I do think Drew Brees is going to have a good game. So I definitely want exposure to the passing game. But either way, I do think Jared Cook is a fine play if you can get all the way up to him. And really, there's not a lot to like at tight end. TJ Hawkinson just plain out sucks. Jason Witten's old. He's going to catch the ball and fall down. That's what he does. But if he gets to the end zone, he'll be fine. But Buffalo has been elite versus tight end, so it's a scary matchup. Jaden Graham, though, he's 3,100. I do have interest in him. So with Austin Hooper being out, I could see him being a little popular here. He's only 3,100. And it's just cheap exposure to the best game on the slate. And if you look at his game log, past 2 weeks, 4 and 6, not fantastic, but he's also dirt cheap. He's had 4 targets in total, 75 yards in total, or right around there. So, and with no Hooper being on the field, he saw 52% of the snaps the first week, and then 66% of the snaps last week. So Jaden Graham definitely on a short list for me. He's probably going to fit your lineups pretty easy, so I wouldn't mind taking a shot at Jaden Graham. Hopefully, you gotta hope he gets into the end zone. If he doesn't, you're probably looking at about 5 points, which isn't too bad. But he's got upside of double-digit points if he can find the end zone. And then really, that's about it. Dawson Knox might make some sense versus Dallas. They are not very good versus the tight end position. I believe they're bottom 10 in points allowed this season. He's not a consistent player, but, week 10, he had 6 targets, 9 points. Versus Miami, 3 targets, and got into the end zone, 11 points. Last week versus Denver, which they've been a tough defense this year, 2 targets, 2 catches, 11 yards, 3 points. So I wouldn't mind Dawson Knox as a cheaper punt play. He saw about 70% of the snaps, so he's not the worst play in the world if you had to spend down a little bit more for Dawson Knox. Other than that, probably no one else I would want to play. And we can really probably just move on to the defense position now. So the Saints, I don't see myself being able to pay top dollar for a defense on the slate, so I'll probably have to pass on the Saints, but they're probably going to grade out as probably the highest projected defense. Or them or their Cowboys or the Bears are pretty close. But I do think the Bears are my favorite play at defense this week. Obviously, no Matthew Stafford for the Detroit Lions. Jeff Driscoll's questionable. He's going to play. But Jeff Driscoll doesn't really scare me too much. Neither does Poe Scarborough. So Bears at 2,500. I think they're a pretty solid play. Falcons defense, I will pass on. The Bills defense, they're very good. Going up against the Cowboys at home. Have the second highest implied team total against them. More of a contrarian option, just hoping the Cowboys don't go off. And they have a good defense, but I really want to play the Bills on this slate. I don't think there's a lot of upside there, especially considering I want to play Zeke. So it's not the best correlation play. And really, I don't see myself playing any Lions unless I, spin all the way down for Bo. So I do think the Bears defense would make the most sense. And I would imagine they are the highest owned defense. So that's really all I got to say about defenses. We can attempt to build half a lineup here. I'm not going to build a full lineup, but I've actually not tried to yet, so we'll see how much salary we have left with the guys I said are absolute locks. I do know it's possible, but let me just see how it looks. So let's plug in Drew Brees. Let's plug in Alvin Kamara. Let's plug in Zeke. And then we can plug in Michael Thomas. So we have 3,700 left, but don't forget we have a defense left, and we got some punt tight ends we can use. So I definitely think this is a possible lineup. So if we go with the Bears defense, I think they're the top defense on the slate. And as for the wide receiver spot, I do like Anthony Miller quite a bit right now. That gives us 4K left. That's not too bad. I think the Bears defense and David Montgomery might be a decent correlation play there. So we can try to plug in David Montgomery. I don't know how it's going to look, but we can try it. So we're going to plug in David Montgomery. We got 3,400 left per position. So I actually don't mind this because then we could probably go down to Jaden Graham, which gives us 3,700 left. And that's going to leave us with Traquan Smith, not the best in the world. Maybe we could go to Dawson Knox, maybe. Hope for the best with Dawson Knox. I said I was only going to build half a lineup, but ended up going with the full one. 3,900 left. That gets you Ted Ginn, not the worst play in the world. But I just made this up on the fly. Please don't go plugging this into all of your lineups. I'm just trying to mess around. But this is definitely how I'm going to start my lineups. Drew Brees, Alvin Kamara, Zeke, and Michael Thomas. That's pretty much how everyone else is going to start their lineups. It's definitely possible, as you guys see. If you guys use Javon Wims, I can definitely open up a ton more salary. But just definitely play around with it. But this would be my core Not that it's anything special, but that's definitely my core heading into the slate. Now I'm going to leave you guys with that. I hope this video was helpful. Hope you guys have a fantastic Thanksgiving. Eat all the pie you can. Eat all the turkey. Although I'm not really a big fan of turkey. It's usually dry, no matter what my mom says. She says it's moist most of the time, but it's dry. But everything else is always fantastic. And I wish you guys the best of luck and have a great day.